But whenever the second plane crashed through the smoke into the other one, well, as soon as I seen that plane hit, I said it's a terrorist attack. They better call Red Alert, all the federal buildings. I mean, that's the only thing it could be, because it came in right above us and just banked and went into the building.
Came in right over your head?
Yeah, right over here, just right over like that, and just banked. You can see it was an American airline. I didn't see the American airline, but some of the workers looked up and seen the plane and know it was an American Airlines.
And then police and emergency workers were rushed downtown.
That's right. So they're all drawn to the scene. These planes have gone into the buildings. They go in to try to evacuate personnel. And later I saw just dozens of police cars that were driving around covered with debris, their windows caved in from the explosion. These were still the operating vehicles that they were using. I spoke with a Lieutenant Thomas Inez, who's with the Port Authority Police. He responded to the scene. He was there trying to rescue people. He saw people actually jumping off the highest floors of the Twin Towers after the planes crashed. And then he was there when the buildings came down.
I guess the scariest part was being covered in dust and not being able to see. And breathing through my hat. It was pitch black.
And you were breathing through your police hat?
My hat, yes, because that's all I had with me.
The people who were jumping, did you see them fall?
Unfortunately, yes. It's not something I would like to talk about, and unfortunately, it's not something I'll ever be able to forget about. At first, you thought it was pieces of the building falling, until you realized that they had arms and legs. And at this point, I really wouldn't want to say anything more about it.
He was off to give blood, I gather, later in the day.
I don't know about him, but I did speak with the parent of a young child who was picking him up from school. You saw a lot of parents rushing to schools to pick up their children. Michael Ruddy stopped to talk to me. His wife worked in the Trade Center until a year ago. What did you tell your son?
Excuse me. I'm very emotional about this. I explained to him that something very terrible had happened, that the World Trade Center, which he knows very well, because he used to call it Mama's Building. I told him that it had been hit by an airplane and had now been destroyed, and it doesn't exist anymore. He's, I think, concerned because he sees how sad I am. He kind of sees the sadness. He sees the sadness in me, and I think he's a little concerned about that. I asked a policeman outside school, what can I do? I want to do something. I want to help. And he said, give blood. So I'm going to go over to maybe St. Vincent's and see if I could do anything.
And indeed, there were many people going to many hospitals in Manhattan offering to give blood. Melissa, you live here, you cover this city, you've seen all kinds of things in New York. How would you describe the way New Yorkers coped with this today?
I don't think, I mean, clearly no one's seen anything like it, and it was a mix of things. You did see a lot of people who were drawn down as spectators, people with cameras. There was the little moment of a Salvation Army team that was setting out trays of milk and cookies, but at the same time, horror on the faces of New Yorkers as they clustered around radios. Cars had their radios cranked. People just devastated by what had happened here today.
Thank you. NPR's Melissa Block.
Here in Washington, less than an hour after the second plane crashed into the World Trade Center, a third aircraft sliced into the Pentagon. Dozens of injured people were shipped to area hospitals. Many of the seats of power in the Capitol, the White House, the Capitol, the Treasury and State Departments, were evacuated. And 2 hours later, United Airlines confirmed a fourth plane crash near Pittsburgh with no reports of survivors among the 45 on board. NPR's Peter Kenyon joins us now. Let's go back to the morning crash at the Pentagon, Peter.
Well, law enforcement, officials say it was American Airlines Flight 77 en route from Dulles Airport in Virginia to Los Angeles that suddenly veered off course and smashed into the Pentagon. It ripped open a hole in the side of 3 of the 5 rings that you can see above ground on the Pentagon. Military officials said the fire was intense, the heat was blistering. At least 40 victims reported in local hospitals, 7 in critical conditions at a burn facility. Hard to get to the site because of the smoke and the fire. One victim from the plane has already been identified now. Barbara Olson, the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson, was aboard that flight. Law enforcement officials told the Associated Press Mrs. Olson called her husband from the plane and described the hijacking, saying that the hijackers were using knife-like instruments. Theodore Olson also confirmed that his wife was on board, saying he wished it wasn't so.
Now, to be clear about this, we had 2 planes hijacked that crashed into the Twin Towers in New York, and this would have been a hijacked aircraft also.
That's right. This one took off from Dulles Airport outside of Washington en route to Los Angeles and just immediately veered off and hit the Pentagon.
Especially shocking, this sort of attack on the Pentagon, the center of the military, and an attack really on the nation's capital.
It really was, Noah, and the rapid evacuation and the confusion around the city today was very telling. Tourists were being yelled at by agitated Secret Service agents, and it's kind of recognizing that confusion and how bad that might seem. The House and Senate leaders quickly gathered to say we're going to reopen the Capitol as soon as possible. President Bush, who had been traveling in Louisiana and Nebraska, decided to come back to Washington, where he's expected to address the nation tonight. And the military remains on high alert status. Military vehicles have been seen on the streets of Washington, D.C. We're not expecting a lot of details from President Bush on how the government will respond to this attack, but clearly there are expectations of something significant. I might mention in Israel today, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon called it a turning point in the war against international terror.
Let's add a bit here about the 4th hijacked plane of the day. It crashed outside Pittsburgh.
Virginia Congressman James Moran, he's a Democrat whose district includes the Pentagon. He was briefed by a military official today, and after the briefing he said that he thought that target was Camp David. The crash actually occurred about 85 miles northwest of Camp David, but there were, as you mentioned, 45 people on board, no expected survivors, and that crashed in a remote field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Peter. NPR's Peter Kenyon.
For the first time ever, all U.S. air traffic was shut down today. The planes involved in the 4 deadly crashes were hijacked from airports in Newark, Washington, and Boston. It's not yet clear how airport security in those cities was breached so dramatically, but the hijackings mean routine security procedures, from X-ray machines to employee background screening, will be scrutinized for vulnerabilities. And there may be limits to how much protection can be tightened. NPR's Emily Harris joins us now. Emily, first of all, do we know anything about